Why did Russia fail to win control of the skies over Ukraine? At the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, this question seemed almost absurd. Russia possessed one of the largest and most technologically advanced air forces on the planet. Yet years later, the skies over Ukraine remain contested. Air superiority decides modern wars. Remove air defenses, gain freedom of action, and ground forces roll. Analysts expected Russia to dominate Ukraine's airspace in days. That dominance never materialized. Expectation met reality. The result reshaped the entire war. At the outset of the 2022 invasion, Russia's entire strategy was built on a single critical assumption: the war would be short. Military and political leaders in Moscow expected a rapid, systemic collapse of Ukraine's government and its armed forces, mirroring a flawed interpretation of past conflicts. They envisioned a campaign lasting days, not months, culminating in a swift political victory. The plan was a high-risk gamble on a decapitation strike. The goal was not to conquer the country through attrition, but to paralyze its leadership and induce a state of shock and awe that would compel a political surrender before any meaningful resistance could coalesce. This fundamental miscalculation would dictate the initial role of its powerful air force, the VKS. In a stark departure from Western military doctrine, which prioritizes achieving air supremacy by systematically dismantling an enemy's entire air defense network, the VKS was not tasked with such a comprehensive mission. A full-scale suppression of enemy air defenses, or SEAD campaign, was deemed unnecessary. Instead, it was assigned a much narrower objective: to enable a lightning ground advance along specific, pre-planned corridors. The VKS was to act as a protective spearhead for mechanized columns, neutralizing threats only within these limited operational zones. The invasion began with a barrage of cruise and ballistic missiles. These pre-planned strikes targeted Ukraine's static Soviet-era infrastructure, airfields, fixed radar installations, and known command posts. The intent was to blind and disorient the Ukrainian military in the opening hours. But a critical intelligence failure undermined the entire effort. Much of the targeting data was out of date. Anticipating the attack, Ukraine had already executed a well-rehearsed dispersal plan. Its fighter jets were moved from major air bases to smaller satellite fields and even highways. Crucially, its mobile surface-to-air missile systems, the Buk and S-300 batteries, left their peacetime garrisons and melted into the countryside, preserving the core of their air defense capability. Damage landed on empty runways and obsolete positions. The knockout blow did not. After the initial, pre-planned volleys were expended, the intensity of the strategic air campaign dropped precipitously. There appeared to be no robust plan for a dynamic second phase of targeting. The assumption was that there would be no need for one. When Ukraine did not collapse, the strategy unraveled. The ground advance stalled, facing unexpectedly fierce resistance and crippling logistical problems. The VKS was now forced into a role it was unprepared for. Jets were diverted from their limited corridor patrols to provide desperate close air support for their beleaguered ground forces. Instead of systematically hunting for the now hidden Ukrainian SAMs from high altitude, pilots were forced to fly low and fast, trying to visually identify targets. This pushed them directly into the lethal engagement envelope of thousands of shoulder-fired missiles, or manpads, and even heavy machine guns. They were exposed and vulnerable. Losses in both advanced aircraft and, more importantly, experienced crews began to mount at an unsustainable rate. A strategy built on hubris had collided with reality, with devastating consequences for Russia's air arm. At the outset of the invasion, Russia critically underestimated Ukraine's air defenses. Pre-war intelligence painted a picture of an aging, largely static Soviet-era system, vulnerable to a swift and decisive suppression campaign. This assessment proved to be a fundamental miscalculation. What Russia encountered was not a brittle relic of the Cold War, but a resilient and adaptive network. Ukraine leveraged its old equipment with remarkable ingenuity and discipline, abandoning rigid doctrine for decentralized, flexible tactics. The system was not static. It was deeply layered and highly mobile, creating interlocking and overlapping fields of fire that covered nearly all altitudes. This Integrated Air Defense System, or IADS, was designed for survival and attrition. At the highest tier, long-range S-300 systems formed a protective shield over key cities, strategic infrastructure, and critical government centers, denying Russian aviation safe access to the deep rear. In the middle layer, mobile medium-range systems like the Buk M1 provided a crucial umbrella for frontline troops, logistics hubs, and vital command nodes, directly challenging Russian tactical aircraft and helicopters. At low altitude, a dense saturation of short-range air defenses, or SHORAD, made the airspace exceptionally lethal. This layer was a mix of anti-aircraft guns and man-portable air defense systems, known as MANPADS. Thousands of these shoulder-fired missiles, operated by small mobile teams, waited for any aircraft daring to fly low to avoid detection by larger radars. To survive, Ukrainian crews perfected shoot-and-scoot tactics. Batteries would briefly pulse their radars to acquire a target, launch their missiles, and then immediately vanish, relocating before a counter-strike could arrive. This mobility was amplified by the widespread use of decoys. Russia frequently expended expensive precision-guided munitions on inflatable S-300s and recently vacated launch sites, wasting valuable assets and intelligence cycles. Ukraine also networked its legacy Soviet radars with modern Western sensor systems and even civilian spotter networks, creating a fused, resilient, and more comprehensive air picture than any single system could provide. This constant movement and adaptation turned Ukraine's defense into a fluid, unpredictable shield. For Russian pilots, every mission became a gamble, as the threat was never where it was last detected. The VKS, Russia's aerospace forces, paid a heavy price for each sortie. The layered ranges made medium and high altitudes risky, while the saturation of MANPADS made low altitude lethal. There was no safe corridor. The sky over Ukraine became, and would remain, fiercely contested. Seed and Dead neutralize enemy radars and missile launchers. Success demands integrated packages: bait, jam, strike, assess. Electronic warfare blinds and protects the strike. The VKS flew piecemeal sorties, not large coordinated packages. Jets often lacked jamming pods and escorts. KH-31P struggled when Ukrainian radars shut down and moved. Brief emissions ended missile guidance mid-flight. High SAM threat forced low-level flying to hide from radar. Low altitude put pilots inside MANPADS envelopes. No safe option. High or low, threats waited. Without Seed, Dead dominance, attrition climbed. Doctrine, training, and tools were not up to the mission. This was arguably the single greatest tactical reason Russia failed to control the skies. Formidable jets on paper are not enough. Air power is sensors, munitions, data links, command and control. In Ukraine, gaps emerged across this ecosystem. Modern targeting pods were scarce. Pods find, identify, and guide weapons on mobile, small targets. Without pods, pilots relied on radar or visual cues and flew closer. Precision munitions existed but were used inefficiently. Unguided drops demanded low, steady passes, lethal in this environment. Robust data links give a shared picture. Russian equivalents were less mature and unevenly integrated. Voice control is slower, narrower, and less adaptive. Electronic warfare support was inconsistent with strike packages. Impressive platforms, weak connective tissue, sensors, munitions, and networks. The VKS often fought like a 20th century force, struggling to act as one cohesive whole. Poor coordination plagued daily air operations. Aircraft arrived late, hit wrong targets, or never showed. Russian air defenses shot down Russian jets. Catastrophic IFF and C-2 failures. A modern air war consumes fuel, munitions, and parts at scale. Shortages drove reliance on unguided weapons. Sustained sortie tempo proved difficult to maintain. Forward bases cut flight times but sat within missile and sabotage range. Ukraine hit multiple bases, destroying or damaging dozens of aircraft. The VKS withdrew, increasing flight times, fuel burn, and wear. Strain rose across pilots and machines alike. Ground forces operated under persistent air and drone threats, a direct result of contested skies. Ukraine did not fight plane for plane. It fought an intelligent, asymmetric campaign. Small drones scanned for artillery, depots, and SAMs. Real-time reconnaissance fed precision fires. TB2s exploited gaps when the VKS failed to cover. SAM crews moved constantly, used decoys, and minimized emissions. Fighters dispersed to preserve a small fleet. Thousands of man-pads blunted helicopter and low-jet attacks. NASAMS and Patriot added robust, layered coverage. Western intelligence gave vital warning and targeting data. Ingenuity plus aid built a defense stronger than Russia anticipated. Russia's failure to achieve air superiority was not the result of a single mistake, but a cascade of systemic problems that spanned strategic planning, tactical execution, technological readiness, and logistical support. It was a comprehensive failure of a system that, on paper, appeared formidable. The campaign began with a deeply flawed strategic assumption that Ukraine would collapse within days, making a prolonged and systematic air campaign unnecessary. This initial miscalculation meant the VKS was never postured for a sustained, high-intensity conflict against a determined adversary. Consequently, no systematic air campaign followed the initial missile strikes. Instead of a methodical, rolling effort to dismantle Ukraine's air defenses, the VKS conducted sporadic sorties, often without clear coordination or strategic purpose. They were met by a surprisingly resilient and adaptive Ukrainian air defense. It was layered, mobile, and intelligently operated, constantly repositioning to create a fluid, unpredictable threat environment. This stood in stark contrast to historical campaigns like Desert Storm, where coalition forces systematically dismantled a static, centralized Iraqi air defense network. The VKS proved unable to execute the complex suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses, or DED, required to counter Ukraine's dynamic approach. This inability was rooted in doctrine and training. Russian pilots, with fewer annual flight hours than their NATO counterparts and less realistic, large-scale training, lacked the proficiency for complex, multi-domain operations in a high-threat environment. Their effectiveness was further blunted by equipment shortfalls. Modern targeting pods were scarce, secure data links for sharing real-time battlefield data were weak or non-existent on many platforms, and electronic warfare support was inconsistent. Compounding these issues, logistics strained under the demands of a protracted war, and the initial stockpiles of expensive precision-guided munitions ran short, forcing a reliance on less accurate, unguided, dumb bombs. In response, Ukraine masterfully leveraged its own strengths: mobility, battlefield innovation with commercial drones, and crucial intelligence and material support from Western partners. As a result, the sky over Ukraine never belonged to Russia. It remained fiercely contested. This denial of air superiority had profound consequences on the ground. It protected Ukraine's vital supply lines from the West and enabled its ground forces to maneuver and conduct effective operations without constant fear of attack from above. Unable to leverage its air power, Russia was forced to lean on massed artillery and costly frontal ground assaults, leading to staggering attrition in personnel and equipment. The war has been a brutal lesson that true air power is not just an inventory of aircraft. It is a deeply integrated system, a seamless web of strategy, training, sensors, networks, logistics, and joint force coordination. When any part of that system fails, the entire structure is compromised. Without them, even the largest air force can be effectively grounded, its potential shackled. Ultimately, the skies over Ukraine demonstrate a timeless military truth. Air superiority is not won by numbers alone, but by superior integration, doctrine, and the ability to adapt faster than the adversary. For more in-depth analysis of modern warfare, subscribe to DefenseScope.